Biden's address, 100 days in office. David Webb, I want to start with you. What are your top line thoughts about that little charade?
I've got notes, pages of notes. Hi, Tommy. Hi, everyone. And to the Fox Nation audience, it's great to be back.
I want to ask you, a lot of talk tonight, a lot of hoorah, America is back, which is interesting to me because the Democrats usually dump on America every chance they get. But do you think the American people bought what Biden was selling them right there?
I think that we live in such a divisive time thanks to the Democrats, and I think that they have this drunkenness of believing everything that Joe Biden says. So, of course, they're going to nod in unison and just applaud aimlessly like a bunch of seals in the circus. But what I have to say about tonight is platitudes and political theater. I mean, you could barely fit all those platitudes into one speech, truthfully. And all of the political theater, how he was praising the fact that there were women behind him. Really? We're back to identity politics? Yes, it's great to have people of every race, every ethnicity, every gender represented in Washington, but doesn't it matter what our qualifications are? Clearly not anymore. Biden spoke a lot about women in the workplace, equal pay. These are untruths, to be very honest. And he also, which is really alarming, talked about women who are abused. And then all that was not caring about women. It was a means to get gun control. So be careful of what Joe Biden says, because what he says and what he's doing are two different things.
Yeah, one of my favorite parts about him talking about women and women in the workforce is that so many women had to leave the workforce, but he failed to mention that so many women had to leave the workforce during the pandemic because they had to stay home to take care of their children that were in virtual learning because of Democrat tyrants like himself and others across the country. But
tax your capital gains, raise your overall rates to probably somewhere north of 43.5%. Americans are literally going to watch their earnings be pulled away and realigned to those who don't produce.
Because Biden talked a lot about paying our fair share, and I was a little curious. I wanted to know what Biden thought his fair share of my hard-earned income was, because he sure had a lot to say about how we should all be paying up, corporations should be paying up, rich people should be paying up. He doesn't agree that we shouldn't have billionaires, but he also thinks that they should be paying to really fund this economy and all of his large ticket programs. So what are your thoughts on how we're going to pay for all of this wonderfulness?
So Joe Biden and his Democrat cronies are the arbiters of what's fair, what's moral, what's just. It's completely up to them to decide what we need. That's not how a democracy works. That's not how America works. That's not what our founders wanted for America. Moreover, I'm no economist, okay? But I know one thing. He said, and I quote, "We want to grow the economy from the bottom." That is not possible. He really talked down to trickle-down economics, which were popular under Bush. I was a little young to remember that, but nonetheless, I do remember it. There is no way to say that we're going to infuse the bottom percentage of earners in America with cash and have them flow it upwards. I mean, these statements that he's making completely defy logic. They defy economic principle. Also, he's talking about schooling, which you touched on earlier. How dare he, as a mother, I will tell you, how dare he talk about preschool and schooling when our kids in the Northeast still haven't seen the inside of a classroom. There is still no plan to get schools open. The COVID bill, the COVID relief bill, provided no relief to working mothers such as myself. So you know what? All of this, again, platitudes, and nothing is grounded in economic reality, educational reality, or American reality.
Hey, amen to that, sister. But I want to bring in Jason because he is the author of Never Let a Crisis Go to Waste, and we know that the Democrats have certainly not left the COVID crisis go to waste. They've been using it every chance they can to send Americans checks to make the government larger, and that is exactly what Joe Biden's speech was all about tonight, was celebrating bigger government. What were your thoughts about what we just heard from our President Biden?
Well, first of all, the visual was just an embarrassment. All of those people, they have masks. And they've been vaccinated. I think that was more theater, and it was an embarrassment.
Comes from being able to control you, your lives, your livelihoods, because then they can turn around and take your hard-earned tax dollars, realign it, reallocate it, and give it out in the form of subsidies or some program. What that does, that binds people. Perfect example.
Ask you about something, because we know as a lot of these speeches go, and certainly every time we hear from the Democrats, it's really their liberal agenda, their liberal wish list, something that was thrown around again again tonight was raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Again, they use the same tired line that someone should not be working a full-time job and be below the poverty line, yada, yada, yada. The same canned line they use over and over again when they're trying to push this farce. What do you think about that? Do you think the Republicans are going to get on board with that? Because I'm a little concerned that some Republicans are looking at that $15 minimum wage and saying that that might be on the bargaining table.
I'm worried as well, and I think you're absolutely right. It's a point of bargaining for them, and they say, hey, if we're at 15, and they'll meet somewhere in the middle, and I don't think that's how our economy will grow, and that's not how this is going to work to help the American people whatsoever. They're influxing illegal immigrants into our society, and that actually drives wages down. So what is it that you want, Joe Biden? Do you want higher wages or cheap illegal labor, which actually hurts the African American and underprivileged communities even more? So to your point, exactly, this is not what America needs. This is not the way to stimulate the economy. But as we know, Democrats never have a plan. All they do is spend money that they don't have. They believe it honestly grows on trees. And what they're doing is not helping the American people in any way, shape, or form. So truly, it's just more platitudes, no action, money that we don't have, and this is going to create massive inflation, and somehow the stock market's still doing well, but I'm really waiting for the other shoe to drop here because there is no plan of action like President Trump had because he actually worked in business. He wasn't a bureaucrat that was in Washington for 50 years. Now we're picking up the scraps and trying to find a way to make it work, and honestly, I have no idea what's going to happen, but let's pray that these Republicans stay strong, stay steadfast, and do not agree to this minimum wage at all.
Yeah, can I just make a really important point to what Erin just said, Tommy?
You got
she
like
brought up
15
wage
seconds,
suppression.
David, because they're coming up with Tim Scott right after you.
All right, wage suppression, lower income communities. How are you going to raise the economy from the bottom up? Think about that.
Set this up. You know, a lot of this, what we heard from Biden tonight, was a lot of what we heard from the Democratic debates, which was free, bigger government, bigger government. So I want to play him talking about his wonderful plan that's going to cost 1.8, and I want to get your reaction to what you thought of it. Let's take a listen to that.
That's why my American Families Plan guarantees 4 additional years of public education for every person in America, starting as early as we can. The great universities in this country have conducted studies of the last 10 years. It shows that adding 2 years of universal high-quality preschool for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old, no matter what background they come from, puts them in the position to be able to compete all the way through 12 years and increases exponentially their prospect of graduating and going on beyond graduation. When you add 2 years of free community college on top of that, you begin to change the dynamic. We can do that. And we'll increase Pell Grants and invest in historical black.
The free college, you know, this has been something on the Democrats' wish list for a long time. Now they're finally going for it. What are your thoughts?
Well, that's just another way to get free Democrat indoctrination now, isn't it? But I worked with Ivanka Trump on the campaign trail both times around, and a lot of the things he said about child tax credits and paid family leave are straight from her playbook. So as much as they want to chastise the Republicans for helping mothers, it sounds like Joe Biden's pretty much taking from that playbook of helping families and increasing the tax credit. But back to your college, yes, this isn't really about educating anyone. It's about putting government before the family and free indoctrination. As indicated earlier, children aren't even in schools in these blue states. He has a lot of gall to talk about educating our young children when these people haven't seen the inside of a classroom for well over a year, and there still is no plan to get them back into the classrooms. By the way, in the red state of Florida, kids went back at the end of August, early September, just to set the barometer there. This is completely unreasonable. The teachers' unions, because he spoke a lot about the unions in his speech, are the ones that are pulling all of the strings. This is no longer about our families. This is no longer about our children. It's about inserting the government in the middle of our lives, making them more important than our families because it gives them more power at the end of the day, and that's the bottom line.
David, I want to ask you about this paid family leave, because I know that there are a lot of Republicans, including Ivanka Trump, that have been very much for this, and so it is somewhat of a bipartisan issue. I am against it. I don't believe in it. I don't believe it's the government's duty and the government's place, but I'm curious to see what your thoughts are on that. Do you think the Republicans are going to jump on board with that part of the American Families Plan, David?
Yeah, there are probably some Americans, maybe a Susan Collins, a Lisa Murkowski, possibly a Mitt Romney and others that may go along with this, maybe a Ben Sass out of, kind of Republican.
Too. He didn't spend as much time on the climate change as I would have expected. However, earlier this week, obviously, and last week with Earth Day, we had a lot of this climate conundrum. The climate worshipers really came out from underneath their rocks to worship the thing that is climate change. But he talked about it a little bit, and he talked about how we need to shift to green energy. What was your take? Do you think that he provided sufficient evidence that he's going to be able to create these green jobs out of nowhere?
You said a very key word there, and that's evidence. I don't think he spoke to it because he knows there is no evidence, and he can't get by without any sort of data on that regard. So he just sort of speaks in those platitudes once again to try to keep the conversation going. But like you, I'm also from flyover country, and I don't forget in Western Pennsylvania when he told people who are coal miners and steel workers that they should just learn how to code. That is so out of touch and so typical of Joe Biden, who spent his time, he alleges, in Scranton, Pennsylvania. No, that's not true. He's been in Washington for 50 years collecting money from our federal government, basically to do nothing but pander to the people and lobbyists in Washington. And this is not right. And the people that are fighting our wars and paying our taxes are suffering. These green jobs do not exist. We know these wind and solar jobs do not exist. They do not pay. And we need to stimulate America and create energy independence like we had under President Trump. But now all we have is a loss of work in many key states that we call flyover country, and so do they. But truth of the matter is, these are the parts of America that are our heartland. These are the parts of America that we rely on every single day. And Joe Biden doesn't seem to care. He just sees them as people who should vote for him and shut up and do exactly what he says. And it's completely wrong. And that's what's going on. And I hope really we see in 2 years in the midterms and in 4 years in the election again, things really start to change. We need better voting laws, but we need people to get out and vote and not vote for these people because they do not want the American worker to do what's crucial, and that's work.
Well, you brought up an important point that I want to talk about, and that is the American worker. So now we're going to shift to another topic that I am certainly fired up about, and I'm sure you guys are as well, and that is immigration. Again, he didn't spend too long on it. It was kind of buried deep within the speech. And it was really interesting to me that he had the goal to talk about immigration when his czar of immigration is seated right behind him and still has not been to the border. And that was policing in America. Let's take a listen to what Joe Biden had to say, and then, Erin, I'm coming to you for reaction.
My fellow Americans, we have to come together to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the people they serve, to root out systemic racism in our criminal justice system, and to enact police reform in George Floyd's name.
Now, I'm assuming by real justice he meant something other than looting the Foot Locker, but then again, I would certainly hope so. But Erin, I want to get your take on that. I will have to say the part of that clip we didn't see is he was talking about law enforcement when he started discussing policing in America, and he, thank goodness, did say that most law enforcement was good. I didn't expect him to say that, so I will give credit where credit is due, but then he went on to basically say that there is rampant systemic racism within our policing system. What did you think about his comments there about the reforms that need to take place?
Sigh, in one word. I don't think any legislation should be in the name of a career criminal. Just one thing, I don't think we should glorify crime. I don't think people that resist arrest have bad plates on their car. I don't think people that carry illegal firearms when they're told to put down a firearm or a weapon. We are glorifying people in this country that no one, of course, ever deserves to die, but we shouldn't be glorifying crime and criminals under the guise of spinning a narrative about racism here. We have to support our police, not bad ones, but we need to support our police force, or else the police aren't going to want to protect us, or people aren't going to want to become police officers. The way that I grow up and the way that my son is growing up is that this is law enforcement. This is a teacher. This is a parent. You have to have respect for them. And what the Democrats are basically instituting here is a policy of not respecting authority. So yes, it's perfectly acceptable to loot and riot at a Foot Locker and take what you think is yours for reparations. But this is going to create a culture and a society of people that have no respect for law and order, no respect for elders, no respect for authority of any kind. And that is not the right direction for America. So what Joe Biden is pushing here isn't the answer.
And I agree with you wholeheartedly. But Jason, I have to ask you, I think that there is this culture of this war on cops, this demonization of police, this pushing of the narrative that there is this rampant systemic racism within the police force. But what is the motivation behind that? Why are the Democrats so hell-bent on advancing that narrative? It's not unifying. It's not correct. It's not helping gun reform. Now, they always tell us they're not coming after our guns. But, Joe Biden wanted to remind us that deer don't wear Kevlar vests, which I thought really was the moment of the night. I don't know if we have that clip. Boy, I sure wish that we did, because it was probably the most animated I've seen him in a while. But we do have it, so let's just all relive that wonderful moment together.
And I'll do everything in my power to protect the American people from this epidemic of gun violence, but it's time for Congress to act as well.
The part where he mentioned that deer don't wear Kevlar vests, but I know that you all probably heard it and enjoyed it as much as I do. But, that's something that I wanted to remind Joe Biden on Twitter and all the Democrats that are confused. The Second Amendment wasn't written for hunters, but the Democrats certainly seem to think that that is the case. But, Erin, I want to go to you. We know that this has been a cornerstone of the Democrat, the liberal agenda for some time now, and now they have the majority to be able to make it happen. But gun reform, common sense gun reform, as they say, I have a feeling it's coming fast and it's coming strong. What do you think?
They're coming for the Constitution. And when he said we've done it before in closing the loopholes, I sort of shook my head and honestly asked myself what exactly he was talking about. Because this is another one of those moments for thee, but not for me. Right? It's sort of like Gavin Newsom at the French Laundry, or Nancy Pelosi getting her hair done inside when none of us were allowed. Because they can have private armed security out there in Washington. They can have barbed wire around the Capitol and fences. They can have all the guns that they want, but they want to take away the average everyday American citizen's right to a gun. And that is our constitutional right as Americans. So this is the very, very scariest part, because when you start chipping away at the Constitution, you do it amendment by amendment by amendment. We already know that the First Amendment has been completely bastardized. So this is truly the next beacon of freedom. And when I talk to people that live in blue states that are riddled with crime, they say, when is this all going to change? When is this going to stop? And I tell them, when you revolt, because people will push you as far as you will let them. Yet these people still get elected. Yet they try to make this legislation. Like Joe Biden still says we want to have common sense gun reform. That's not what America needs. So we have to get out there and vote against these policies and talk to our legislators and elected officials, or else we're in real trouble as a nation.
It's very interesting that the same group of people that want to defund and abolish the police, or at least back groups that want to defund and abolish the police, also don't think that American citizens need firearms for self-defense and protection. I don't know exactly what they want us to do. I'm certainly not going to be counting on Joe Biden or Kamala Harris for my personal safety anytime soon, or I'm coming to a city near us.
Well, first of all, let me say I do believe in common sense gun control. I make sure the weapon is cleaned, ready, able to be used when I need it to defend myself or defend my family. So that's common sense gun control.
Jason Chaffetz, David Webb, good to see you guys. I hope that at some point we can do this again in person in New York City. But until then, God bless you guys. Good night and take care.